For today's video, I'm sharing 12 of my favourite low-light aquarium plants. Now this isn't meant to be a complete list of all low-light viable plants in the hobby, it's just some of my personal favourites, and I've kept all of the plants featured in the video in my own tanks under low-light conditions. But before we dive in, I want to quickly explain what I personally mean by low-light aquarium plants, because there are some variables out there. The old school measurements of wattage or lumen per litre aren't really viable anymore because modern LED aquarium lights are considerably more powerful than even lights from a decade ago, so a lot of the entry level lights are perfectly fine. So what I mean by low light aquarium plants is anything that's going to work well under the most affordable entry level lights on the market right now, and there's plenty of options out there. I will link to my regularly updated article in the description that covers the best budget-friendly aquarium lights in the hobby, but even the most budget-friendly ones of those will work perfectly well with all of these plants. At the time of recording this video, my personal favourite is the Seaoura SR616, but the Hygger HG58 works perfectly well too, and in reality they are very similar lights that are basically interchangeable, and I leave affiliate links for both in the description. So I want to kick things off with Anubias, and I know that this probably won't surprise a lot of people because it's a notoriously easy low-light viable plant. I often recommend it to beginners in a lot of my own content too because it just works in so many setups without issue. It's incredibly hardy and easy to keep even if you're brand new to the planted tank side of the hobby, and thankfully it thrives in low-light conditions and is very forgiving for common beginner mistakes. I keep Anubias in a lot of my own tanks, specifically varieties from the Anubias barteri species, and that's what I personally recommend you start with too. But because there's a lot of different varieties from the Anubias barteri species out there, I do want to give some specific recommendations. If you have a larger tank, then Anubias barteri var barteri is a fantastic option in a low light tank because it can get massive. Anubias coffeefolia, caladifolia and nana are great options for medium-sized low-light tanks as well, but they can also work in larger tanks with minimal issues. For smaller nano tanks, Anubias nana, coinleaf and petite are excellent options for low-light nano tanks, but keep in mind that Anubias petite really is tiny and it's usually just used to add pops of colour to rocks or driftwood. Since Anubias is an epiphyte plant, it's usually best attached to driftwood or rocks in the tank rather than buried directly in the substrate too. Next up is Echinodorus Tropica, which is a lab-created cultivar of the popular Echinodorus belleri, more commonly known as Amazon sword. As far as I'm aware, this particular variety was first introduced by the Tropica plant nursery here in Europe, which is why it carries their name. However, other plant nurseries like Denellum have stuck with the Tropica version of the name because it's just such a well-known plant now, even though it hasn't been out for long. I only started seeing this in widespread circulation in my area last year, and I've tried it in several tanks and it consistently does well regardless of what power lighting I have on the aquarium. Now, some plant nurseries do list it as a medium category plant, and I definitely don't agree with that. In my tanks it has been extremely beginner friendly and very easy to keep even under very low light conditions. One thing to keep in mind is its smaller size because this plant does max out at around 10 centimeters or 4 inches. So if you have a larger or medium sized tank, going with the original Echinodorus belleri or Amazon sword is probably a better option if you're looking for a larger plant. But if you're on the nano or medium-sized tank side of the hobby, or if you're looking for a foreground plant for a large tank, then Echinodorus Tropica really is an excellent, very easy to keep plant. Next up is Limnophila Sessiliflora, which is a fast-growing stem plant that I keep in several of my tanks under a wide range of different lighting setups, and it always does consistently well. And by that, I mean it consistently does well regardless of the light I use. It can get to a stage where it will grow so fast in a low bioload understock tank like a betta fish tank. It can actually grow so fast it ends up starving itself and absorbing all of the nutrients out of the water column. But outside of that specific situation, it's a very, very easy to keep plant, and it also offers the benefits of using a lot of common toxins in your aquarium water as essential nutrients to support its rapid growth rate, helping to keep your fish, shrimp and snails safe. When I first got back into the hobby, I was growing this plant under a very underpowered 500 lumen output light and it grew without issue. Some sources do say it can come in leggy under low powered lighting, but personally I do think that is for legacy lights like T5s and things like that, whereas with modern LED lights it's just not an issue. Unfortunately, it's worth noting that Limnophila Sessiliflora is on the controlled species list for the United States, but to my knowledge it is widely available in every other country. Next up is Helanthium green, and I'm going to be doing a dedicated video on this plant soon since I often get asked about what I think is the best low-tech carpeting plant in the hobby. I will link to my article in the description where I go over several viable carpeting plant options for low-tech tanks, but if I could only choose one specifically for a low-tech, low-light setup, it would definitely be Helanthium green. I currently keep it in several tanks across a wide range of different lighting conditions, and it performs very similar in both high light and my low light tanks, meaning its growth rate really doesn't change much. I have multiple tanks with it grown under a very budget friendly entry level Seaoura SR616 light, and as you can see it is slowly filling out, but keep in mind these tanks are newer than my more established tanks with Helanthium green in it. In my opinion, this really is an excellent carpeting plant option for smaller nano tanks all the way up to medium sized tanks of around 29 gallons, and it'll look perfectly fine. Just plant it in the foreground of your tank and let it do its thing, and it will naturally send out runners and start to carpet across the foreground, eventually filling into a lush carpet. Next up is the only red plant that I felt confident including in this list, since its red coloration does depend heavily on light and intensity. But Ludwigia Mini Super Red is an excellent option, and it is currently sold under several different names depending on where you are, but it is widely available and easy to find. Now it's definitely easier to get the vibrant red tones out of this plant under stronger lighting, but it can work under entry level affordable options too. The one you're seeing on screen now grows under an affordable Seaoura SR616 light, and it did take a long time, and I literally mean 2 or 3 months, for the red hues to start popping on this plant, but as you can see they are starting to come through. Being a variety of Ludwigia, it can melt the low leaves off its stems, but unfortunately this is just one of those things when you keep Ludwigia in its submerged form. Trimming the healthy tops off the plant and removing the low levels of the stem and then replanting the healthy tops back into your tank is the easiest way to fix this that I'm aware of in a low light tank. Next up is Salvinia Minima, which is the only floating plant featured on the list. But a lot of floating plants out there can survive and do perfectly well under low powered lighting, but in my opinion Salvinia Minima does stand out as the hardiest option, which is very easy to grow. I linked to my article in the description which goes over several other viable floating plants for this type of tank, but if you are new to the planted tank side of the hobby and want a very reliable, easy to grow plant, Salvinia Minima is the one for you. Now it is worth noting that there's several different varieties of Salvinia in the hobby these days, and Salvinia Minima is sometimes sold under different names as well, so it can get a little confusing. That said, buying it from a reputable plant nursery such as Tropica or Tenellum or Aquafleur, something like that which has a good reputation, will give you the highest chance of making sure you are getting the correct plant. I first grew Salvinia Minima under that same 500 lumen light that I mentioned earlier, and to no surprise it's done well under the more modern LED aquarium lights too. As a floating plant, it sits directly on the water's surface, which means it benefits more from the maximum power intensity directly out of the light before it dissipates the further it travels. However, surface coverage comes with a downside, as it can block light from reaching your submerged plants if not maintained correctly. My advice is to monitor its spread across the water's surface, and once a week I come in with a comb and remove as much of the excess plant growth as required, so about 25% of the remaining tank surface is covered in the plant. And in case you're wondering, the Salvinia shown in this video clip is brand new to a tank that's cycling, so there's still biofilm on the surface and the Salvinia petals are still smaller. It'll probably max out at around double this size. Next up is Bucephalandra, and while there's many different varieties available in the hobby these days, every single type of Bucephalandra I've personally kept has done well in low light conditions. I'm particularly a big fan of Bucephalandra Kedagang, and it's the one I constantly recommend because it's widely available, it looks great, and it's very beginner friendly. Bucephalandra is native to the rainforests of Borneo, so it's evolved in conditions where there's a lot of considerably taller plants above it blocking out a lot of the light. Because of this, it just naturally grows in low light conditions, making it perfect for low light aquariums. By chance, I keep the majority of my Bucephalandra varieties in aquariums with low light setups, and it does perfectly fine. Just remember that this is an epiphyte plant, so you need to secure it onto the hardscape rather than bury it in the substrate. Next up is Pearlweed, which is a plant sometimes labelled as being advanced by certain nurseries in the hobby, but in my experience and the experience of a lot of other people, this is actually very easy to grow. The tank you're seeing now is my Pearlweed jungle setup, which runs on an affordable Seaoura SR616 light, and as you can see, the plant is absolutely thriving. But even more impressive than that is that the Pearlweed in my shrimp jar, which uses a tiny 6-watt clip-on Hygger light, is also thriving and growing at a rapid pace. Unfortunately, I do personally think that the advanced label on this plant puts a lot of people off trying it in their own aquariums, but again, in my experience and the experience of a lot of other people, it is very easy to grow. Next up is Cryptocoryne Beckettii Petchii, and while most varieties of Cryptocoryne in the hobby are very beginner friendly and will work well in low light tanks, this particular variety has been bulletproof in my experience. It does stay relatively small and maxes out at 10 cm or 4 inches in height, so a lot of people use it in smaller nano tanks or medium sized tanks, but it can work in larger tanks as a foreground plant too. It is native to Sri Lanka, which means it's more adapted to harder water, mineral rich conditions, which can give it a faster growth rate. However, my water is far from that. It's very soft, very mineral depleted, and it works perfectly well in my tanks without issue. I've also grown this plant under several low powered lighting units without issue, so it will definitely work well under the more modern entry level aquarium lights on the hobby. Next up is Rotala Rotundifolia, which is a plant that my regular viewers will recognise because I recommend it on a regular basis. It's just such an incredibly easy to grow plant that is very beginner friendly and does very well in low light setups. Until recently, I had this in over half of my tanks, grown under a wide range of different lighting models and lighting intensities, but it will work perfectly well under the lights I mentioned earlier, and I am growing it under the Seaoura SR616 in 3 tanks right now without issue. As you can see in this particular tank, which uses an entry-level Seaoura SR616, the new growth on the tips of the plant have a soft yellow hue to them. Under stronger lighting, this colour can shift to orange, pink and sometimes even red. However, with the modern entry-level lighting units in the hobby, the best you can hope for usually is the yellow tips, and a lot of them will still be green if you're using older generations of lighting units. But again, most people don't care about the colour of the tips of their Rotala, they just want a healthy, thriving plant in their tank, and it does well under all low lights I've tried it under. Next up is Dwarf Sag, but this one does come with a caveat. Unlike all of the other plants featured in the video which have a predictable maximum height, Dwarf Sag seems to just make its height up as it goes along, and it can vary widely in your tank. In some of my setups it stayed nice and compact, while in others it's grown surprisingly tall, taller than some of the dwarf varieties of Vallisneria such as Vallisneria nana or Vallisneria asiatica. This unpredictability does make tank placement a little bit tricky, especially if you're intentionally trying to use it as a foreground carpeting plant in a larger tank. That said, I have still seen plenty of people use Dwarf Sag as a carpeting plant in their larger tanks, often in place of Helanthium Tenellum green, which is usually shorter and better suited for smaller nano tanks or medium tanks. Unfortunately, there is a lot of contradictory information out there about what causes Dwarf Sag to become tall or small in certain tank setups. Although a lot of sources do agree that it's something to do with the lighting of the tank, there is a lot of people with contradictory opinions in that as well, with some people saying it'll stay short under low light and other people saying it'll get tall under low light. But if you're happy with the unpredictability of the plant, Dwarf Sagittaria is still a great option for low light tanks in my experience. Finally, we get to Java Fern, which is a classic low-light plant in the hobby that can thrive in many different setups, but this one also comes with a caveat. While Java Fern is often recommended as being easy and beginner-friendly, it can actually be surprisingly temperamental. In some tanks it grows beautifully with minimal effort from you, but in other tanks it can struggle with no clear reason. There are several theories out there on what causes this to happen, but in all honesty I don't think anyone knows for sure at the time of recording this video. I haven't done any extensive testing myself yet, but personally I do lean more towards it being something to do with water temperature and potassium levels in the tank, which cause it to be temperamental. My advice is to save costs and just go with one Java Fern plant to test in your tank to see how it responds to your specific water. If it melts, you haven't lost that much money, but if it does well, you can buy more and fill out the tank. Just remember that this is also an epiphyte plant, meaning you need to stick it onto your hardscape like rocks and driftwood rather than plant it into your substrate. But if your water parameters are optimal for Java Fern to thrive, it can grow well in low light tanks. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Thanks for watching, have a good day and good luck with your low light aquariums.